I will snap your arm in half and make your brat watch. Bradley sneered, his face flushing crimson as he threw black mixed martial arts gloves at my chest. They hit my collarbone with a heavy thud, dropping to the lawn of his Buckhead estate. The jazz playlist suddenly felt loud against the dead silence. Dozens of guests clutching champagne flutes froze. My mother Vivian and father Warren stood still, their faces draining of color. My sister Kendra crossed her arms, looking down at me with the resentful pity she had mastered since childhood. My 7-year-old daughter, Layla, trembled behind my legs, her small fingers digging into my sundress. Seconds earlier, she had tripped over a garden hose, dropping her lemonade glass. It shattered against Bradley's silver Porsche 911, scratching the expensive paint. Before the glass settled, Bradley crossed the patio, grabbed my little girl by the collar, and lifted her off her feet. I intervened, forcing his hand away from my child with a swift strike to his wrist. Now he stood 3 feet away, rolling his massive shoulders. At 6'4", my white brother-in-law towered over my frame. Everyone knew his obsession with cage fighting. He loved violence, especially when he held power, and loved reminding my parents his old money status made him king. "Put the gloves on, Sienna," Bradley barked, his fists clenching. "You want to play the tough, unhinged veteran. You want to act like a thug in front of my investors. Put them on. Defend yourself, or I swear to God I will throw you and your mistake of a child out onto the street. You disrespected my property." "Bradley, please, she didn't mean to," I said, my voice remarkably, even my eyes tracking his center of gravity. I was not begging. I was de-escalating. It was tactical protocol. "Do not talk back to him," my mother shrieked from across the patio. "Layla damaged his car. You are an embarrassment. You spent years in the military learning how to act like a violent street brawler instead of building a real career, and now you attack the man who secured your father a corporate board seat. Leave my sight." I kept my eyes locked on Bradley. He was fueled by rage, entitlement, and the absolute certainty his wealth and gender made him invincible. He expected a weak, defenseless single mother who would crumble under his intimidation. He expected me to cry, apologize, and drop to my knees to beg for mercy in front of his friends. He did not know he had just threatened a combat veteran. He did not know I spent the last decade leading highly classified operations. He did not know I was currently the founder and chief executive officer of a global cyber intelligence firm, hiding my immense wealth behind a quiet suburban life. "I am truly not going to fight you, Bradley," I stated calmly, pushing Layla gently behind a heavy stone planter to ensure she was out of the strike zone. "We will pay for the scratch." "You can't afford the tires on this car, you piece of trash," Bradley roared. He didn't even wait for me to pick up the gloves. He lunged. He threw a heavy, looping right hook aimed directly at my jaw, putting his entire body weight behind the punch. Against untrained opponents, it would have been a devastating knockout blow. To me, it just moved in extremely slow motion. I didn't flinch. I immediately stepped directly inside his guard, slipping under the wide arc of his fist. My training took over, cold and mechanical. I drove the heel of my left palm sharply into the nerve cluster under his armpit, momentarily paralyzing his right arm. I pivoted my hips, grabbed his extended wrist with both hands, and applied a brutal rotational lock. I dropped my center of gravity and drove my knee into the back of his knee joint. Bradley's leg buckled instantly. I maintained the joint lock, twisting his arm sharply up behind his back until the sickening pop of a dislocated shoulder echoed across the backyard. Bradley hit the ground face first with a wet, heavy thud. The entire altercation lasted exactly 3 seconds. A blood-curdling scream erupted from Bradley's lungs as he writhed on the grass. His face smashed against the dirt, his expensive linen shirt tearing at the shoulder seam. I kept my knee pressed firmly against his spine, my grip on his twisted arm unwavering. The sheer shock of pain instantly drained the color from his face, replacing it with a terrified gray. "You do not ever touch my daughter again," I whispered, leaning down so only he could hear the lethal promise. "And you do not ever threaten me. Understand?" "My arm. You broke my arm, you crazy witch," he shrieked, gasping for air, tears of agony springing to his eyes as he squirmed frantically. I released him, standing up smoothly and brushing a stray blade of green grass from my lovely sundress. The wealthy guests were frozen in absolute horror. Some dropped their drinks. My sister Kendra stared at me with her mouth hanging wide open, her hands pressed against her cheeks in sheer disbelief. I turned to Layla, peering out from behind the stone planter. I offered her a soft, reassuring smile, extending my hand. "Come on, baby. We are going home now." As I took her small hand and began walking toward my SUV parked in the driveway, the stunned silence of the party finally shattered. "You are so dead, Sienna!" Bradley screamed from the grass, clutching his dangling, useless arm as my mother rushed to his side. "I am calling Child Protective Services tomorrow. I will tell them you are an unhinged, violent psychopath. I will have Layla taken away from you, and I will sue you until you beg on the streets. I swear it on my life. I promise you will completely lose everything for this absolute humiliation today. Get out of here right now." My mother dropped to her knees beside Bradley, her designer gown soaking up the mud. She did not cast a single glance toward her granddaughter, who was still trembling behind me. Instead, she cradled Bradley's uninjured shoulder, cooing apologies to the man who had just tried to assault her own flesh and blood. My father Warren stood frozen for a fraction of a second before scrambling to help, barking orders at the hired catering staff to fetch ice and call a private doctor. "Are you completely out of your mind?" my mother shrieked, finally glaring at my face. Before I could process the sheer absurdity of her priority, she lunged forward. Her hand cracked across my cheek with a sharp, stinging slap that echoed over the murmurs of the horrified guests. I did not flinch. I barely felt the physical impact, but the emotional strike severed the last fraying thread of our family bond. "You are an absolute disgrace to this family, Sienna," Vivian screamed, her chest heaving as she pointed a manicured finger at my face. "You come into this beautiful home, surrounded by Atlanta's most elite circles, and you act like a common street thug. You spent 10 years in the military just to become a violent, unhinged animal. Look at what you did to him." Vivian continued, her voice echoing across the patio. "He grabbed Layla by the throat, Mom," I stated, my voice dangerously quiet. "He raised his fists at me. I neutralized a threat. He is lucky I left him breathing." "He was upset about his car," she fired back, completely dismissing the physical assault on a child. "It is a vintage Porsche. You have no respect for things you cannot afford. Bradley was simply teaching you a necessary lesson. You assaulted him like a savage," she finished. "You are just jealous." Kendra's voice pierced the tense atmosphere as she pushed past the whispering crowd. My younger sister dropped to her knees next to her husband, her face a mask of performative outrage. "You have always been jealous of me, Sienna. You are furious that I married a wealthy, successful white man who actually comes from high society, while you ended up a bitter single mother living off a veteran pension. You wanted to humiliate us. I want nothing to do with his money or his society, Kendra," I replied smoothly, shielding Layla's eyes from the pathetic display. "I want him to keep his hands off my daughter." "He barely touched her," Kendra yelled, her voice breaking into a theatrical sob as she stroked Bradley's sweaty forehead. "You overreacted because you are unstable. You have severe PTSD, Sienna. Everyone knows it. You belong in a psychiatric ward, not raising a child." My father stepped up, stepping between me and his wealthy friends. I looked at Warren, hoping to see a fraction of paternal instinct. Instead, I saw a man terrified of losing his country club status. "Apologize to him right now," Warren ordered, his tone laced with disgust. "Bradley just nominated me to the executive board of his hedge fund. He is bringing this family into circles you could never dream of entering. Get on your knees, beg for his forgiveness, and maybe I will talk him out of calling the police." "I will never apologize for protecting my child from an abuser," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "And if you choose his fabricated wealth over your own granddaughter's safety, then you are officially no father of mine from today." "Do not you dare speak to your father that way," Vivian intervened, stepping closer with her fists clenched at her sides. "We gave you every opportunity to be part of the elite. We paid for etiquette classes, we introduced you to proper gentlemen, and you threw it all away to crawl through the mud in combat boots. You chose to be a failure. Now you have ruined the most important networking event of the year." Bradley, still gasping in the grass, managed to push himself up on his good elbow. His face was smeared with dirt and spit. His arrogant facade was completely shattered. I am not pressing criminal charges today, Bradley hissed, his teeth gritted in agony as he glared at me with venom. Because I do not want you getting out on bail. I am calling my lawyers, and I am calling Child Protective Services the second I get a cast on this shoulder. You are a danger to society. I will prove you are an unfit mother. I will make sure Layla is placed in the foster system, and I will drain every single penny you have in civil court. You are completely finished. He spat on the grass near my shoes. We fully support Bradley, my father added loudly, ensuring the wealthy audience heard his allegiance. We will testify to CPS that you are unstable and prone to random violence. We will tell them you have been suffering from severe combat trauma. You are cut off, Sienna. You are completely dead to this family. I looked at the four of them. My mother, my father, my sister, and the arrogant predator they worshipped. They had drawn their line in the sand. They believed they held all the power to absolutely destroy me. They believed their status, their money, and their lies would crush a seemingly ordinary single mother. They had no idea they had just declared war on a ghost. I did not waste another breath on them. I simply tightened my gentle grip on Layla's small, shaking hand. "Keep your eyes forward, sweetie," I murmured softly to her. "We are walking away now." I turned my back on my parents, my sister, and the man writhing on the ground. The wealthy socialites parted instantly, clearing a wide path for me as I calmly walked toward the driveway, leaving the toxic illusion of my family far behind me in the damp grass of that wretched mansion courtyard. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting warm patterns across the marble island. I stood at the stove flipping a buttermilk pancake. The scent of vanilla brought peace to our quiet suburban home. Layla sat at the counter swinging her legs and coloring in her sketchbook. She had slept through the night insulated from the chaos of yesterday's barbecue. I wanted to keep her in that innocent bubble for as long as humanly possible. I poured her a glass of fresh orange juice. Before I could set the glass down, sharp knocks rattled the heavy oak front door. The pounding was not polite. It was the rhythmic thud of law enforcement. My military instincts flared instantly. I lowered the heat on the stove, wiped my hands on a towel, and turned to my daughter. I kept my voice light and steady. "Layla, take your sketchbook and go up to your bedroom. Close the door and put your headphones on. I will call you down when breakfast is ready." She nodded, hopping off the stool and bounding up the stairs. I waited until I heard the soft click of her door closing before I moved toward the entryway. I checked the security feed on my monitor. 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers stood on my porch, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Flanking them was a stern woman in a gray pantsuit clutching a clipboard. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, keeping my posture relaxed and non-threatening. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Are you Sienna Vance?" the woman asked. Her tone clipped and authoritative. She simply stared at me with cold, evaluating eyes. "I am. I am Agent Miller with Child Protective Services," she stated. "These officers are here to escort me. We received an emergency hotline report late last night, followed by sworn affidavits this morning from 3 family members. May we come inside?" "You may state your business from the porch, Agent Miller," I said, blocking the threshold. Agent Miller bristled, but opened her clipboard. "We received a highly credible report that you are suffering from severe untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. The complainant stated that you experienced a violent psychotic break yesterday afternoon at a family gathering. They claim you viciously assaulted your brother-in-law, breaking his arm and causing severe bodily harm while your 7-year-old daughter was present. The report characterizes you as highly unstable, armed, and an imminent threat to the safety of your child." I stared at her, my expression blank. Bradley had actually done it. He had rallied my parents, Vivian and Warren, to sign sworn statements labeling me a deranged, violent veteran. They were using my 10 years of military service as a weapon to paint me as a broken, dangerous animal. It was a calculated smear campaign designed to rip my child from my arms and punish me for not bowing to an arrogant predator. "The individuals who filed that report are retaliating against me because I stopped an assault on my daughter," I explained calmly. The man with the broken arm grabbed my child by the neck. I intervened using non-lethal defensive force. "That is not what the sworn statements say," Agent Miller countered, her voice raising a fraction. Your mother and father testified that the child simply dropped a glass and you entered a violent fugue state. They stated you have a history of aggressive outbursts since returning from your deployments. Your sister corroborated the entire story. Three highly respected members of the Atlanta business community have gone on record stating you are an unfit mother. The sheer weight of their betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the ribs. My parents had sold me out to protect a hedge fund manager. They were willing to throw their granddaughter into the foster care system just to appease the fragile ego of a white millionaire who had promised my father a corporate board seat. I am a decorated military veteran, I stated, keeping my voice level. I do not have a history of aggressive outbursts. I do not have untreated trauma. This is a fabricated report designed to harass me. We do not take chances with child welfare, Ms. Vance, Agent Miller said, stepping closer. Given your combat history and the severity of the injuries inflicted on the victim yesterday, my department has deemed this a high-risk environment. We have a judge standing by to sign an emergency removal order. We are here to take Layla into temporary state custody until a full psychological evaluation can be completed. The word state custody hung in the morning air, chilling me to the bone. They wanted to take Layla. They wanted to hand my little girl over to strangers, forcing her to sleep in a sterile facility while I battled an agonizing bureaucratic nightmare. This was Bradley's ultimate revenge. He knew he could not beat me in a physical fight, so he was using his wealth and my parents' influence to weaponize the government against me. One of the police officers shifted his weight, his hand resting conspicuously on his radio. Ma'am, we do not want to make this a chaotic situation. Please step aside and bring the child down. If you resist, we will be forced to detain you for obstructing a child welfare investigation. That will only make your situation worse in front of a family court judge. I was backed into a terrifying, suffocating corner. If I showed even a fraction of anger, they would document it as proof of my volatility. If I raised my voice, they would claim I was aggressive. If I fought them, they would draw their weapons, arrest me, and drag Layla out of the house screaming. My blood relatives had orchestrated a flawless trap, wrapping a noose tightly around my neck. They expected me to crumble, to cry, to beg them to let me call my parents and apologize to Bradley just to keep my own child. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the icy calm of my training wash over me. Panic was a luxury I could not afford, and it was precisely what they came here to document. I stepped back, pulling the heavy oak door wide open, and gestured toward the formal living room with a perfectly steady hand. Please come inside, I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. If we are going to discuss my mental stability and my daughter's safety, we will do it sitting down. I have nothing to hide, and you have a duty to conduct a thorough investigation before removing a child from her home. Agent Miller blinked, clearly thrown off by my total lack of hysteria. The two police officers exchanged a confused glance, but followed her across the threshold. I directed them to the sofa, remaining standing myself to maintain a tactical advantage in the room. You mentioned sworn affidavits claiming I suffer from violent, untreated PTSD. I began walking over to the locked steel filing cabinet hidden behind my mahogany desk. Before we discuss yesterday's incident, I need to correct the public record regarding my medical history. I unlocked the cabinet using a biometric thumbprint scan, a detail that made the younger police officer raise his eyebrows. I pulled out a crisp, sealed manila envelope bearing the official seal of the Department of Defense. I walked back to the coffee table and slid it directly into Agent Miller's lap. Open it, I instructed. She frowned, breaking the seal and pulling out the thick stack of documents. Her eyes scanned the first page and her rigid posture immediately faltered. This is a Level 5 psychological clearance evaluation from the Pentagon, I stated, watching the color drain from her cheeks. It is dated less than 3 weeks ago. You will see that I am cleared for highly classified global operations. My mental health profile is immaculate. I do not have PTSD. I do not have a history of aggressive outbursts, and I am entirely fit for duty and motherhood. The people who filed that report committed perjury to weaponize your agency against me. Agent Miller swallowed hard, flipping through the pages. The commanding officer's signature and the federal stamps were impossible to dispute. The narrative Bradley had meticulously crafted was already crumbling. A clean psychological evaluation is significant. Ms. Vance. Agent Miller conceded, her tone losing its previous sharp edge. However, it does not erase the fact that an assault occurred yesterday. You severely injured a man. We still have sworn statements from 3 witnesses claiming you attacked him without any provocation. I am fully aware of what they claimed, I replied, crossing my arms. Now let me show you what actually happened. I picked up the remote control from the coffee table and turned on the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall. I accessed my secure home server. I drive a modified SUV equipped with a 360-degree 4K resolution security camera system, I explained, pulling up the corresponding video file from yesterday afternoon. I had parked my vehicle on the circular driveway directly facing the patio where the incident took place. The cameras run continuously. Let us review the unedited footage of my so-called psychotic break. I pressed play. The high-definition video filled the screen, capturing the sunny backyard barbecue with crystal clarity. The audio was pristine. The officers leaned forward, their eyes glued to the screen. They watched Layla trip over the garden hose. They watched her drop the glass. They saw it shatter against the silver Porsche. Then the true nature of Bradley Kensington was broadcast into my living room. The footage clearly showed Bradley storming across the patio, his face twisted in unhinged rage. It showed him grabbing a terrified 7-year-old girl by the collar of her shirt and lifting her off the ground. It recorded his exact words, threatening to snap my arm in half and make my child watch. It showed him throwing the MMA gloves, aggressively lunging at my face with a closed fist and attempting a knockout blow. It showed a mother stepping in to save her child, using precise, controlled defensive force to neutralize a massive, violent attacker. The video ended with him shouting threats from the grass. I muted the television and turned to face the room. Total silence reigned. The older police officer slowly took off his uniform cap, running a hand over his short hair. He looked absolutely disgusted. He grabbed the little girl by the neck, the officer muttered, shaking his head. He assaulted a minor, threatened to cause grievous bodily harm, and threw the very first punch. Yes, officer, I said calmly. And then he, along with my parents and my sister, filed a false police report and lied to Child Protective Services to steal my daughter out of pure spite. Agent Miller closed her clipboard, looking physically sick. The realization that she had been used as a pawn by a wealthy, vindictive family was fully setting in. She looked at the Pentagon evaluation, then up at the frozen frame of Bradley, holding my daughter on the television screen. Ms. Vance. Agent Miller started, her voice shaking slightly. I owe you a profound apology. We were given completely fabricated information. Based on this video evidence, you acted entirely within your rights as a parent and a citizen, protecting herself and her child. This emergency removal order is entirely invalid. Will you be pressing charges against Mr. Kensington for the assault on your daughter and the false report? The older officer asked, his hand hovering over his notepad. Not today, I replied smoothly, a cold, calculated strategy already forming in my mind. I will handle Mr. Kensington and my family through my own legal channels. You may close your investigation. The officers and Agent Miller stood up, apologizing profusely as they backed out of my home. They practically ran to their vehicles, eager to escape the massive liability they had almost stepped into. I watched the cruiser pull out of my driveway, the red and blue lights reflecting faintly against the pavement. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and I engaged the deadbolt, sliding the security chain into place. The silence in the foyer felt different now. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of a victim waiting for the next blow. It was the sharp, highly pressurized quiet of a battlefield right before a major offensive. I walked upstairs to check on Layla. She was lying on her bed, her headphones glowing with a soft blue light as she hummed along to a cartoon. I kissed the top of her head, told her breakfast would be ready in 10 minutes, and stepped back out into the hallway. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The caller ID flashed my sister's name. Kendra was calling. I knew exactly why she was reaching out. She wanted to hear the devastation in my voice. She wanted to savor the sound of me crying as CPS agents tore my daughter away. I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. Are they gone yet? Kendra asked, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy that barely concealed her glee. Did you pack a nice little overnight bag for Layla? Foster homes can be so terribly cold this time of year. I told you, Sienna. You never cross Bradley. He always wins. The agents left empty-handed, Kendra. I replied, my tone flat and devoid of any emotion. They reviewed the security footage of your husband assaulting my child, realized you all committed perjury, and decided they did not want to face federal charges for participating in a fraudulent child removal. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the receiver. The line went silent for 3 long seconds. I could perfectly picture her standing in her lavish Buckhead kitchen, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her phone. The pristine, unshakable illusion of her billionaire husband's power had just cracked. You are lying, Kendra hissed, her voice dropping its sweet facade and adopting a venomous edge. Bradley's lawyers are the best in Atlanta. You are just a psychotic veteran. No one believes you over him. The police believed the 4K video evidence, Kendra. You should probably advise your husband to hire a criminal defense attorney. Now why are you really calling me? You think you are so smart, Sienna. She spat out, her anger boiling over. You think you can just walk away from this family and embarrass us in front of our friends. Mom and Dad are absolutely furious. You humiliated the man who was going to elevate our family name. Do you have any idea what Bradley's hedge fund means to this family? You ruined everything. So Mom and Dad decided to teach you a permanent lesson about respect. I leaned against the hallway wall looking at the framed photos of Layla. Get to the point, Kendra. They cut you off, she announced triumphantly, her voice regaining its smug, arrogant cadence. Warren called the family wealth manager 10 minutes ago. You are officially removed from the family trust. Furthermore, Vivian contacted the bank and froze the joint savings accounts you use. Every single dime of the money they graciously allowed you to manage under their supervision is gone. Your debit cards will decline. Your credit lines are shut down. You have absolutely nothing. The joint accounts she mentioned were a control tactic my parents had instituted years ago. They had insisted I deposit my military pension and savings into a family-managed portfolio, claiming it was the only way a clueless soldier could build wealth in Atlanta. They used it as a leash, a financial tether to ensure I always remained subordinate to their country club lifestyle. They truly believed those accounts were my only lifeline. They want you to starve, Sienna, Kendra continued, practically purring into the receiver. Mom said you have exactly 1 week before your mortgage payment bounces. Bradley told them to let you suffer until you are desperate. When you are ready to crawl back, you will drive to our house, get on your knees in the driveway, and beg Bradley for forgiveness. If you do exactly what he says, maybe Dad will unfreeze enough money for you to buy groceries. The sheer audacity of their strategy was almost impressive. In their world, money was the ultimate weapon. They wielded their upper-class status like a blunt instrument, assuming that financial ruin would break the spirit of a woman who had survived intense combat zones. They expected me to panic, to cry, to plead for a second chance to be a part of their elite hollow family. Are you finished? I asked quietly. You are a joke, Sienna, a broke, pathetic joke. Have fun living in a cardboard box. Tell Vivian and Warren I appreciate the clarity, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. They made their choice. They chose to protect a wealthy abuser over their own granddaughter. They chose high society over their own blood. I want you to remember this phone call, Kendra. I want you to remember that you pushed for this, because when the fallout hits, and it will hit very soon, I will not save you. I hung up the phone before she could utter another word. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a solitary ounce of panic over the frozen bank accounts or the revoked family trust. The inheritance my parents dangled over my head like a carrot was utterly meaningless to me. They thought they had just severed my only financial lifeline. They had no idea they had merely severed the only thing keeping my absolute wrath at bay. I walked down the stairs, passing the kitchen, where the pancakes were now cooling on the stove. I bypassed the living room entirely and headed straight for the solid steel door at the end of the dim hallway. The heavy steel door did not look like it belonged in a suburban colonial home. It masqueraded as a reinforced storm shelter entrance, painted a dull gray to blend in with the surrounding architecture. I placed my right hand flat against the hidden biometric panel embedded in the drywall. A microscopic laser scanned my fingerprints, followed immediately by a subtle red beam that swept across my right retina. The heavy internal locking mechanisms disengaged with a series of muffled, mechanical clicks. I pushed the door open and stepped out of the illusion of the struggling dependent daughter. I stepped into the command center of Vanguard Aegis. The room was entirely soundproofed and encased in military-grade shielding to prevent any electronic surveillance or signal leakage. Wall-to-wall monitors illuminated the dark space with a cool blue glow, displaying real-time data streams, global satellite feeds, and encrypted communication channels. The air hummed with the quiet, relentless power of independent server racks housed behind reinforced glass cooling units. This was my true domain. My family believed I had wasted the last decade crawling through the mud as an ordinary soldier completely oblivious to the reality of modern warfare. They thought I was a broken veteran who relied on their pitiful country club connections to survive in the real world. They had no idea that my final years in special operations were spent commanding elite cyber warfare divisions, dismantling international syndicates, and neutralizing high-value targets from behind a keyboard. When I retired my commission, I did not just integrate into the civilian workforce, I conquered it. I founded Vanguard Aegis, a private cyber intelligence and security contracting firm. Within 5 years, we had quietly become the invisible shield, protecting 30% of the Fortune 500 companies. We secured global supply chains, thwarted state-sponsored hacking attempts, and provided elite physical security details for foreign dignitaries. My net worth had crossed the billion-dollar threshold 2 years ago. I kept my wealth entirely obscured through a labyrinth of shell companies, blind trusts, and offshore corporate entities. I lived in a modest suburban home, drove a standard SUV, and allowed my parents to micromanage a joint savings account containing barely $50,000. I let Vivian and Warren believe they controlled my financial destiny because it kept them complacent. It gave them the illusion of dominance they so desperately craved. The family trust they had just proudly exiled me from was a complete joke. Kendra gloating over freezing my debit card was like a child boasting about stealing a penny from a bank vault. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair at the center of the console array. I cracked my knuckles, feeling the lingering adrenaline from the morning's confrontation with the Child Protective Services agents gradually transforming into absolute razor-sharp focus. I was done playing the passive victim in their twisted family dynamic. Bradley Kensington wanted to use his wealth and privilege to rip my daughter away from me. He wanted to destroy my life because I refused to cower before his fragile, arrogant ego. My parents had enthusiastically assisted him, weaponizing my military service to paint me as an unhinged monster. They wanted a war. I was going to give them a total annihilation. I tapped the secure comms channel on my primary keyboard, routing an encrypted call directly to my Chief Operations Officer, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a former intelligence analyst who had served under my command in the military. He was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely loyal to Vanguard Aegis. The line connected instantly. "Good morning, boss," Marcus said, his voice crisp and professional over the secure channel. "I saw the alert trigger on your residential security network earlier. The local police dispatch logs indicated a child welfare unit was dispatched to your address. Do we have a problem requiring physical extraction?" "The immediate physical threat has been neutralized, Marcus," I replied, my fingers flying across the glowing keyboard as I began opening secure terminal windows. Bradley Kensington filed a fraudulent report using my parents as sworn witnesses. They attempted to have Layla removed from my custody. I provided the Pentagon evaluations and the vehicular dashcam footage to the responding agents. The local authorities retreated and the case is closed. But the strategic situation has fundamentally changed. We are shifting from a defensive holding pattern to a full-scale offensive strike. "Understood," Marcus stated, the tone of his voice sharpening with immediate anticipation. "What is the primary target objective?" "I want a complete microscopic forensic audit on Bradley Kensington and his entire financial portfolio," I ordered, staring at the blinking cursor on my central monitor. He parades around Atlanta pretending to be a financial genius born into untouchable old money. He manages a highly exclusive hedge fund that my father constantly brags about to his country club friends. I want to know exactly where every single dime of that money comes from, where it is being stored, and how it is being moved. Crack his proprietary servers, bypass his personal firewalls, dig into his offshore holdings. If he bought a cup of coffee 5 years ago, I want the receipt on my desk. I am allocating 3 of our top penetration testing teams to this objective immediately. Marcus confirmed the sound of rapid typing echoing faintly through the receiver. A target like Kensington usually relies on standard commercial encryption. We will tear through his firewalls in less than an hour. Do you want us to maintain a stealth profile, or are we leaving calling cards? Absolute stealth. I commanded, my eyes locked on the scrolling data feeds as Vanguard Aegis operatives began infiltrating Bradley's digital life. He cannot know he is being hunted. He still believes I am crying on my kitchen floor, worried about how I am going to pay my mortgage next week. Let him bask in his false sense of victory. I do not just want to embarrass him, Marcus. I want to completely dismantle his empire. It is already done, boss. Watch carefully. I watched the primary monitor as lines of encrypted code cascaded down the screen in a blur of luminous blue. Marcus was not exaggerating. My elite cyber analysts at Vanguard Aegis were tearing through Bradley Kensington's supposedly impenetrable digital fortress effortlessly. The firewalls he paid millions to maintain were systematically bypassed, dismantled, and rewritten by my team in seconds. I leaned forward in my ergonomic leather chair, tracking the incoming data streams as they automatically decoded and organized themselves into comprehensive financial dossiers. Bradley portrayed himself as the untouchable heir to an old money dynasty. He built his entire public persona on the illusion of generational wealth, commanding respect from Atlanta's elite society through sheer intimidation and financial dominance. He wielded his status like a weapon, demanding absolute submission from anyone he deemed beneath him, especially my family. The reality downloading directly onto my server was a vastly different story. "Talk to me, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady as I opened the first decrypted folder. "What are we looking at here?" "We have full access to his primary banking nodes, his offshore routing accounts, and the internal ledgers for Kensington Capital Management," Marcus replied, his tone laced with professional disgust. "It is a complete house of cards, boss. His family's generational wealth dried up entirely nearly a decade ago. His father made a series of catastrophic investments in commercial real estate right before the market crashed. The estate they live in, the vintage cars he drives, the bespoke suits he wears, it is all financed through predatory loans and shell companies. He does not own a single tangible asset." I zoomed in on a spreadsheet detailing the last 5 years of his personal expenditures. The numbers were staggering. Bradley was burning through millions of dollars a month just to maintain the illusion of a billionaire lifestyle. He was paying exorbitant interest rates to shadow lenders to keep the lights on at his Buckhead mansion. My sister Kendra had married a ghost. She tied her entire identity to a man drowning in toxic debt, completely oblivious that her perfect high society marriage was built on a foundation of absolute financial ruin. If his generational wealth is gone, how is he funding the hedge fund? I asked, my fingers flying across the keyboard to cross-reference the data. He secured another $50 million in capital last quarter. He bragged about it to my parents. "That is where it gets incredibly dark," Marcus stated, rapid typing echoing through the secure channel. "We isolated the algorithmic trading software he claims to use for Kensington Capital Management. The software is a total dummy program. It does not execute a single actual trade on the global market. The impressive returns he reports to his investors at those lavish country club dinners are completely fabricated. He is manually altering the quarterly statements using a basic spreadsheet manipulation tool." The sheer audacity of his operation sent a cold chill down my spine. Bradley was not a brilliant financial mind. He was a desperate, cornered animal playing a dangerous game with extremely powerful people. "It is a Ponzi scheme," I murmured, staring at the flow of money moving between the accounts. "He is taking fresh capital from new investors to pay the fabricated dividends of his original investors." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "And the people he is scamming are not ordinary retail investors. He is targeting the wealthiest, most influential families in Atlanta. The judges, the politicians, the real estate magnates. The very people who were drinking his champagne and laughing at you yesterday. He is stealing millions from them right under their noses to fund his personal lifestyle. If this fund collapses, it will wipe out half of the elite society in this city. I clicked through the list of his primary investors. I recognized dozens of names. These were the people who had looked at me with pity and disdain. They sneered at my military service, whispering behind their hands about the unhinged veteran who dared to ruin their elegant afternoon. They believed Bradley was their golden ticket to unlimited wealth. They had entrusted their fortunes to a man who would gladly watch them go bankrupt just to keep a vintage Porsche in his driveway. They worshipped him because he represented everything they desired, while he orchestrated their absolute financial destruction. How much time does he have before the liquidity dries up? I asked, analyzing the cash flow projections. Based on his current burn rate, the fund will default within the next 48 hours, Marcus answered grimly. He missed a massive dividend payment to a shadow bank in Miami. He is actively scrambling to find fresh capital to cover the deficit. That is why he was so desperate to recruit your father to his executive board. He needed your parents' pristine social reputation and connections to bring in a new wave of unsuspecting victims. He is using your family as bait to keep his sinking ship afloat for a few more days. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. Bradley did not care about my parents or Kendra. He viewed them as disposable assets. He manipulated their desperate need for elite validation, dangling the promise of exclusive country club access to blind them to his true intentions. He invited them into his inner circle because he needed fresh blood to feed his monstrous scam. My father, Warren, was so blinded by proximity to white old money power that he eagerly handed over his entire social network to a common thief. He is cornered, I said, a lethal strategy taking root in my mind. A cornered predator is incredibly dangerous but highly predictable. He knows the collapse is imminent. He knows the people he stole from will not just sue him, they will completely destroy him. He needs an exit strategy. We are already monitoring his encrypted communications, Marcus assured me. If he tries to move a single dollar, we will flag it instantly. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. Bradley had threatened to tear my daughter away from me. He had weaponized the government against my family, relying on the very illusion of wealth he had stolen from his friends. He thought he was playing a game of intimidation against a defenseless single mother. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed the keys to his complete destruction to a cyber intelligence commander. I had the power to expose his entire operation to the world. I had the absolute power to watch his entire world burn down. But exposing him immediately was far too simple. It lacked the necessary tactical precision. Keep digging, Marcus, I ordered, my voice dropping to a whisper. Find the structural weaknesses. Find the legal loopholes he established. I want to know exactly how he plans to escape the fallout when this Ponzi scheme detonates. Marcus's fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, the rapid clatter echoing through our encrypted channel. Running a deep dive into his corporate structuring now, boss. I am pulling original incorporation documents for Kensington Capital Management. Give me 10 seconds to bypass redacted layers. The main monitor shifted from banking ledgers to complex legal flowcharts. I watched as the digital architecture of Bradley's empire materialized. It was a labyrinth of shell companies, all registered in places like the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and Delaware. He had intentionally designed the corporate structure to be a nightmare for any financial regulator to untangle. He insulated himself perfectly, I noted, tracing the lines of ownership. Bradley is listed as a managing consultant, not the primary fiduciary. If the Securities and Exchange Commission knocks on his door tomorrow, he can legally claim he merely advised the fund. He is not legally responsible for the missing capital. Exactly, Marcus confirmed, his voice tight. He structured the entire Ponzi scheme so that the ultimate legal liability falls on the executive board of directors. The board holds the fiduciary duty. Whoever signed those specific incorporation papers is officially on the hook for wire fraud, securities fraud, and massive tax evasion. The federal mandatory minimums for this level of theft will put the signatories in prison for the rest of their natural lives. Pull up the signatures, Marcus. I want to see exactly who he conned into holding the bag. The screen flashed. A high-resolution scan of a highly classified incorporation document filled my field of vision. I stared at the bottom of the final page. Two signatures were rendered in elegant, familiar cursive ink. Warren Vance. Vivian Vance. A heavy, suffocating silence filled my underground command center. I did not blink. I simply stared at the undeniable proof of my parents' absolute foolishness. Boss, Marcus said softly, breaking the tension. Your parents are listed as the sole legal directors of the primary holding company. Bradley did not just invite them into his high society circle. He legally bound them to a sinking ship. He made them the ultimate fall guys. The full sickening reality of Bradley's master plans snapped into place. He never respected my father. He never valued my mother's desperate attempts to fit into Atlanta's elite circles. He saw two deeply insecure, status-obsessed people who would do anything to rub shoulders with old money billionaires. He offered them phantom board seats, framing it as a massive social elevation. In their blind greed and worship of his white privilege, they signed complex financial documents they clearly did not read or comprehend. I is going to let them take the fall. I said, my voice eerily calm as the magnitude of his betrayal settled in. When the liquidity dries up and the investors realize their millions are gone, the federal authorities will follow the paper trail. The trail leads directly to the executive board. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will kick down my parents' door, arrest them, and seize every single asset they own to pay back the victims. Bradley will simply pack a bag, claim he was just a hired consultant, and walk away completely clean. He set them up for decades in federal prison, Marcus added, pulling up the corresponding federal sentencing guidelines. They are looking at a minimum of 30 years each. They will die behind bars, and Bradley will likely be sitting on a beach in a non-extradition country. A dark, bitter laugh escaped my throat. My parents had just stood in a Buckhead mansion and proudly declared me a violent disgrace. They had willingly testified to Child Protective Services, attempting to throw their own granddaughter into the foster system, all to protect Bradley. They believed he was their savior, their golden ticket to ultimate societal power. They had completely abandoned me to protect a man who had meticulously planned to destroy their entire existence. They handed him the knife and he positioned it right at their throats. I murmured, staring at my father's arrogant signature on the screen. They thought they were outsmarting me by freezing my joint accounts. They thought they held the ultimate financial leverage. They have no idea they are currently standing on a federal landmine and Bradley holds the detonator. Do you want me to initiate a block on the federal warrants? Marcus asked, his tone shifting back to tactical execution. We have the clearance to bury these documents deep enough that the Securities and Exchange Commission will never find the connection to your parents. We can redirect the digital paper trail back to Bradley. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. The temptation to protect them was a fleeting, hollow instinct. They had not hesitated to destroy my life. They had enthusiastically participated in a plot to traumatize my 7-year-old daughter. Protecting them now would only validate their toxic delusion that they were untouchable. Do not alter a single document, Marcus, I commanded. Leave the paper trail exactly as Bradley designed it. My parents made their choice. They wanted to play high-stakes games with a predator. I will let them experience the exact consequences of their blind allegiance. We will focus our resources entirely on trapping Bradley so he cannot escape the blast radius. Understood, Marcus replied. I am setting up automated alerts on his remaining offshore pathways. If he tries to board a plane or wire a cent, we will shut him down instantly. Before I could outline the next phase of the digital blockade, a priority alert flashed bright red across my secondary monitor. It was a notification from Vanguard Aegis's open-source intelligence division, which constantly monitored local media and social networks for threats against my personnel. I opened the alert. My blood ran cold. Marcus, hold on, I said sharply. Bradley is not just preparing his financial exit strategy. He is actively launching a massive public relations strike. He is going after Layla. The notification on my screen displayed a direct link to the most exclusive digital newsletter in Atlanta. The headline alone was designed to obliterate my life. Local Buckhead hero assaulted by deranged combat-crazed veteran sister-in-law. I clicked the link, my eyes scanning the viciously crafted article. Bradley had leveraged his high society connections to plant a massive smear campaign. The article did not explicitly use my name to avoid lawsuits, but the identifying details were unmistakable. It described an unstable single mother fresh from military deployments who had experienced a violent psychotic break during a family gathering. It painted Bradley as a valiant protector who stepped in to save a child from a mother's unhinged wrath only to have his arm brutally snapped. The anonymous quotes were the most sickening. "We are terrified for the little girl," one quote read clearly, provided by my own sister Kendra. "The mother belongs in a psychiatric ward. She relies on her wealthy family to survive, yet repays them with savage violence." Another quote, unquestionably from my mother Vivian, stated that the family was actively pursuing legal avenues to remove the child from the dangerous environment. "He is trying to destroy your credibility before the financial collapse," Marcus noted over the secure comms. "If he successfully paints you as a violent, delusional veteran, nobody will believe you when you finally expose his Ponzi scheme. He wants the elite community to view you as a total pariah." "He is not just going after my credibility, Marcus," I replied, my voice tightening with a fierce protective rage as my personal email inbox chimed with a new message. "He is actively targeting Layla." The email was marked with high importance. It was from the headmaster of Oakwood Academy, the prestigious, incredibly expensive private school Layla attended. The subject line read, "Urgent security concerns and campus access." The headmaster informed me that several high-profile parents had expressed severe distress regarding my presence on campus following deeply concerning rumors. Until further notice, I was explicitly banned from exiting my vehicle during student pickup and drop-off. Bradley had successfully weaponized the very community my parents worshipped. He had mobilized the wealthy suburbanites to do his dirty work. They were treating my 7-year-old daughter like a contagion. "I have to go pick her up," I told Marcus, grabbing my keys from the desk. "Monitor his accounts. Do not let him move a single dollar offshore. I will handle this pathetic social warfare before I drop the financial guillotine on his neck." I left my hidden command center, locked the heavy steel door, and drove straight to Oakwood Academy. The pickup line was a parade of luxury vehicles. Normally, parents would stand on the manicured lawn chatting and drinking artisan coffees while waiting for the final bell. Today, as I pulled my standard SUV into the queue, the atmosphere was instantly toxic. Mothers in designer athleisure wear visibly recoiled as my vehicle approached. I saw them whispering behind their hands, throwing nervous, judgmental glances in my direction. Two private security guards, clearly instructed by the headmaster, stepped off the curb and positioned themselves near the front doors, their eyes locked firmly on my car. They were treating me like an active shooter. The school doors opened. Children flooded out into the bright afternoon sun. Layla emerged clutching her backpack, but she was not smiling. She walked down the concrete steps with her head bowed. Usually she would be surrounded by her friends, laughing and trading stickers. Today, a wide, invisible circle had been drawn around her. The other children were actively avoiding her, pulled away by their panicked, gossiping mothers. I unlocked the back doors. Layla climbed inside and buckled her seatbelt in total silence. I pulled out of the school driveway, my heart shattering as I looked at her small, defeated reflection in the rearview mirror. "How was school today, baby?" I asked gently, keeping my tone light. Layla looked out the window, her voice trembling. "Chloe's mom came and picked her up early. She was supposed to hand out invitations to her pool party today. She gave one to everybody in class except me. When I asked why, she said her dad told her I was not allowed to come over anymore because my mommy is dangerous." A hot, searing wave of fury flooded my veins. Bradley Kensington had crossed the ultimate line. He was using his influence to emotionally terrorize my little girl. He was orchestrating her exclusion, weaponizing her innocent friendships to punish me. My parents had likely fueled the fire, calling the other elite parents to validate the cruel rumors. They were willing to sacrifice Layla's happiness just to maintain their standing with a fraudulent millionaire. "You listen to me, Layla," I said, my voice projecting absolute unshakable strength. You are not dangerous. I am not dangerous. We are safe and we are strong. Sometimes people get scared of things they do not understand, and they tell lies because they are cowards. But cowards never win. Do you understand me? She wiped a small tear from her cheek and nodded. Yes, Mommy. I drove us home, my mind executing complex tactical calculations. I could not simply wait for the federal raid to clear my name. The social damage was happening right now. The school board was convening an emergency meeting tomorrow evening. Kendra was the vice president. She orchestrated the meeting specifically to push for a formal vote to have Layla permanently expelled, citing the safety of the other students. She wanted to deliver the ultimate blow to force me into submission. They wanted to play high society warfare. They wanted to use secrets and reputations as weapons. I parked the SUV in our garage and walked Layla inside, setting her up with a snack and a movie. Then I headed straight back to the biometric scanner. I entered the Vanguard Aegis Command Center and opened a new, highly encrypted terminal. I did not just have access to Bradley's financial records. My firm secured data for hundreds of elite clients across the globe. I pulled up the membership roster for the Oakwood Academy Parent-Teacher Association Board. Marcus, I called out over the comms, I need you to run a specialized background sweep on the Oakwood Academy Board of Directors, specifically the board president Harrison Sterling. On it, Marcus replied, the typing resuming instantly. What exactly are we looking for? Everything, I commanded coldly. They want to kick my daughter out of school based on fabricated gossip. Let us see how much they enjoy it when I bring their actual documented felonies to the next meeting. The following evening, I walked through the vaulted mahogany doors of the Oakwood Academy Administrative Building. The Emergency Parent-Teacher Association board meeting was convened in the executive conference room. Oakwood was not just a school. It was the ultimate proving ground for Atlanta's elite, a place where generational wealth dictated the rules. I did not knock. I placed my hand flat against the heavy brass handle and pushed the double doors wide open. 12 board members, dressed in bespoke suits and pristine designer dresses, sat around a massive, polished walnut table. At the head of the table sat Harrison Sterling, the board president, and a prominent local real estate mogul. Directly to his right sat my sister Kendra, whispering into his ear. When the doors swung open, the low murmur of their conversation ceased instantly. Kendra looked up, and a wide, victorious smirk spread across her face. She truly believed she had orchestrated my social destruction. Sienna, Harrison stated, his voice laced with manufactured authority and deep condescension. This is a closed executive session. You were explicitly informed that you are not permitted on campus. Leave this room immediately, or I will have the campus police forcibly remove you. You are wasting your breath, Harrison, Kendra chimed in, crossing her arms and leaning back in her plush leather chair. She has no respect for authority or protocol. We were just finalizing the expulsion paperwork for Layla. We simply cannot have a child with such a violent, unhinged mother jeopardizing our prestigious community. The vote is already unanimous. You are finished here, Sienna. I did not break my stride. I walked deliberately across the rug. I bypassed the empty chairs and walked straight to the head of the table, stopping just inches from Harrison Sterling. I pulled a black dossier from my briefcase and dropped it onto the polished wood directly in front of him. I strongly suggest you open that folder, Harrison, before you say another word about campus security or my daughter's enrollment. I commanded, my voice dropping to a glacial, unwavering calm. Because if you dare to call the police into this room, I guarantee you will be the one leaving in handcuffs. Harrison scoffed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. I do not respond to baseless threats from unstable parents. It is not a threat, I replied smoothly, resting my hands on the back of the nearest chair. It is a verified financial audit. Last night, my intelligence team ran a comprehensive sweep of your personal and corporate holdings. You portray yourself as a pillar of Atlanta high society, funding the new science wing to mask your operations. The first page details your primary shell company in the Cayman Islands. The second traces the illicit wire transfers you have executed to avoid federal taxes. The third is a direct copy of the fraudulent returns you filed with the Internal Revenue Service. Harrison's arrogant posture dissolved instantly. He stared at the black folder as if it were an active explosive device. His trembling hand reached out and he slowly flipped open the cover. The color completely drained from his face. His eyes darted frantically across the classified financial logs, banking nodes, and offshore routing numbers Vanguard Aegis had effortlessly extracted from his hidden servers. I know about the $3 million you laundered through your commercial real estate developments. I continued, making sure my voice carried clearly to every single board member at the table. I know about the fake consulting fees paid to offshore entities to hide assets during your divorce. You are committing massive systemic tax evasion and wire fraud. If I forward that exact folder to the federal authorities, you are looking at a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. The room fell dead silent. The suffocating tension was palpable. The other elite parents shifted uncomfortably, exchanging panicked glances. They suddenly realized the woman standing before them was not a helpless, disgraced veteran. She was a lethal predator holding a loaded gun to their leader's head. "How did you get this?" Harrison whispered, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he looked up at me. He was sweating profusely, the illusion of his untouchable white privilege shattering. "I have access to things you cannot even comprehend," I stated coldly. I turned my gaze to the rest of the board members. Harrison is not the only one. My firm specializes in risk management and intelligence. I ran sweeps on every single person sitting at this table. I know which of you are bribing city officials for zoning permits. I know which of you are hiding assets. I know every dark, pathetic secret that funds your luxury lifestyles. If anyone here ever attempts to weaponize this school against my daughter again, I will personally hand-deliver your financial records to the federal prosecutor. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The sheer magnitude of my leverage crushed any remaining resistance in the room. "Now," I said, looking back down at Harrison, "let us revisit the agenda for this evening. You are going to formally declare that all rumors regarding my family are entirely fabricated, and you will personally guarantee that my daughter faces zero exclusion on this campus. Are we absolutely clear?" Harrison swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the damning evidence. "Yes," he stammered, his voice weak and defeated. "The expulsion is dropped. The rumors are false. Your daughter is welcome here." I looked at my sister. Kendra stared at me in absolute shock, her mouth hanging open. The powerful people she had spent years desperately trying to impress were currently cowering in sheer terror of the sister she had relentlessly mocked. Her meticulously orchestrated had failed spectacularly. "You should probably leave the Parent-Teacher Association, Kendra," I advised her softly, picking up the black dossier and sliding it back into my briefcase. "You are completely out of your depth." I walked out, leaving the terrified elite of Atlanta sitting in the absolute ruins of their own unmatched arrogance. The primary monitor in my command center flared with a sudden pulsing amber light. The automated surveillance algorithms we had deployed across his hidden networks were triggering a cascade of critical alerts. Marcus typed furiously on his end of the encrypted channel, his breath hitching slightly as the raw data flooded into our secure servers. Bradley was not just preparing a theoretical contingency plan for his inevitable financial ruin. He was actively executing a rapid, desperate exit strategy. He knew the walls of his fraudulent empire were collapsing, and he was making his final move. "Talk to me, Marcus," I demanded, leaning closer to the glowing screen as complex routing protocols flashed before my eyes. "What exactly triggered the amber threshold?" "Hi is liquidating everything, boss," Marcus replied, his voice tight with absolute disbelief. "I am tracking a massive coordinated sell-off across his shadow portfolios. He is draining the last remaining liquidity from the Kensington Capital Management accounts. He just initiated a staggered wire transfer protocol. He is attempting to move $50 million of stolen investor capital out of the country." "Where is he routing the funds?" I asked, watching the digital map on my secondary monitor light up with international transfer pathways. "Switzerland," Marcus confirmed. "He is using a series of randomized automated microtransactions to bypass the standard federal flagging systems. He is funneling the money through 3 different shell corporations in the British Virgin Islands, washing the digital signatures and dumping the clean cash into a highly secured anonymous private banking vault in Geneva. He is completely emptying the vault. He is taking every single dime left in the fund. The scale of his cowardice was breathtaking. Bradley had spent years cultivating an image of untouchable old money superiority. He demanded absolute submission from my family, parading around Buckhead as a financial titan. Yet at the first sign of actual consequence, his only instinct was to steal from his trusting investors and run like a common thief. He cannot access that Swiss account unless he is physically present to provide the biometric decryption keys. I noted my mind analyzing the logistics of his international escape. If he is moving the money now, he is planning to leave Atlanta immediately. Check the regional flight logs and private charter registries. He has to have transportation waiting. I am already in the Federal Aviation Administration database. Marcus responded, the clatter of his mechanical keyboard echoing through the speakers. I am running a cross-reference on his known aliases and corporate travel accounts. Wait, I have a hit. It is not under his name. He booked a private Gulfstream jet through a holding company. The flight is scheduled to depart from a private airstrip in DeKalb County this coming Saturday at midnight. The filed flight plan lists Zurich as the final destination. He is fleeing the country this weekend. I said, a cold, calculating smile touching my lips. He is going to abandon the entire facade. Dig into the passenger manifest, Marcus. I want to know exactly who he is taking with him on that flight. I guarantee you he is not booking a luxury private jet across the Atlantic just to sit alone. Accessing the manifest now, Marcus stated. 2 passengers are confirmed for the transatlantic flight. The first passenger is listed under the name Alexander Vance. I am running facial recognition on the attached passport profile. A high-resolution image popped onto my screen. It was Bradley sporting a newly grown beard and dark glasses. It is a highly sophisticated dark web-forged passport. He stole your family's surname to create his fake identity. That is incredibly bold. And the second passenger, I pressed, ignoring the insult of him using my parents' last name for his criminal escape. The second passenger is a Russian national named Ekaterina Volkov. Marcus revealed, bringing up a photograph of a stunning blonde woman in her late 20s. She is not just a travel companion, boss. I am looking at their encrypted communication logs. She is his mistress. They have been maintaining a secret relationship for the past 3 years. He bought her a luxury condominium in Miami, using the stolen hedge fund money. She is currently waiting for him to finalize the wire transfers so they can board the flight to Switzerland together. I stared at the image of the Russian mistress, letting the gravity of his deception wash over me. My sister Kendra had built her entire identity around her marriage to Bradley. She constantly mocked me, claiming my life was a pathetic failure, while she reigned as the untouchable wife of a wealthy white aristocrat. She defended him when he threatened my daughter. She gloated when my parents froze my bank accounts. She was completely, utterly blind. Bradley was going to leave Kendra with absolutely nothing. When that plane took off for Zurich on Saturday night, Kendra would wake up on Sunday morning in a foreclosed mansion. Her credit cards would violently decline. Her luxury vehicles would be repossessed by shadow lenders. Her perfect high society life would instantly vaporize into thin air, leaving her penniless, humiliated, and completely alone to face the wrath of Atlanta's scammed elite. But the most devastating blow was not aimed at my sister. The true lethal impact of Bradley's cowardly escape plan would strike my parents. He is abandoning Warren and Vivian to take the absolute full force of the federal indictment. I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper as I looked at the legal documents on my tertiary monitor. When the Securities and Exchange Commission realizes $50 million vanished into a Swiss vault, they will look at the legal signatories of Kensington Capital Management. My parents' names are the only ones on those specific documents. Bradley will live a lavish lifestyle in Europe with his mistress. Warren and Vivian will sit in an interrogation room facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud. The harsh vibration of my cell phone shattered the quiet hum of my command center. I pulled my gaze away from the encrypted federal indictment guidelines, illuminating my tertiary monitor, and looked down at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a name I had expected to see eventually. It was my father, Warren. I held up a single hand, signaling Marcus to pause his relentless tracking of Bradley Kensington's offshore routing protocols. I took a deep, steadying breath, intentionally softening my posture to prepare for the psychological performance ahead, and accepted the call. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited for him to speak. I hope you have spent the last 48 hours reflecting on the absolute catastrophe you caused, Warren stated, his voice dripping with aristocratic condescension and a complete lack of paternal warmth. Your mother and I have been working tirelessly to repair the severe social damage you inflicted upon this family. Bradley has been remarkably gracious considering you nearly crippled him in front of our most vital financial allies. I is willing to offer you one final opportunity to make amends, but it will be entirely on our terms. I remained silent, letting his arrogance echo through the phone. He genuinely believed I was sitting in a dark, empty house, terrified of losing my meager allowance. He had no idea I was currently staring at high-resolution images of the fake passport his golden son-in-law was using to abandon him to the federal authorities. Bradley is hosting his 10-year investment anniversary gala this coming Saturday evening at the Ritz-Carlton. Warren continued, his tone hardening into a strict command. It is going to be the most exclusive networking event of the decade. The governor will be there along with every major hedge fund manager and real estate developer in Atlanta. You are going to attend this gala, Sienna. You are going to walk through those doors, and you are going to publicly rectify your abhorrent behavior. What exactly do you mean by rectify, Dad? I asked, artificially injecting a slight trembling vulnerability into my voice. I needed him to believe his financial embargo was successfully crushing my spirit. You are going to walk directly up to the main stage before the keynote presentation begins, Warren demanded, outlining my public execution with cruel precision. When Bradley stands at the podium, you will drop to your knees in front of him. You will look at the audience, and you will loudly apologize for your violent, unprovoked assault. You will admit that you are suffering from severe combat-related mental instability, and you will thank him for his incredible generosity in not pressing criminal charges against you. You will grovel, Sienna. You will make it absolutely clear to every single person in that ballroom that Bradley Kensington is a forgiving savior, and you are a broken dependent liability. The sheer depravity of his demand was staggering. My own father was enthusiastically orchestrating my ultimate public humiliation. He wanted to parade me in front of the city's elite society, forcing me to kneel before a predator who had physically threatened his 7-year-old granddaughter. He was trading my dignity to secure his pathetic seat at a fraudulent table. If you complete this apology exactly as I have instructed, Warren promised, his voice taking on a manipulative, soothing quality. Your mother and I will instruct the bank to unfreeze your joint checking accounts. We will restore your monthly stipend from the family trust. You can go back to your quiet, ordinary life, and we will ensure Child Protective Services drops their pending investigation into your fitness as a mother. We will give you your life back. I looked at my primary monitor. The screen displayed the exact corporate filings bearing his signature, the very documents that legally tied him to the $50 million theft Bradley was currently executing. And if I refused to kneel for him, I whispered, allowing a fabricated sob to catch in my throat. If you refuse, you are completely dead to this family, Warren declared, stripping away all pretense of affection. We will permanently legally sever all ties with you. You will not receive another dime from the estate. We will formally testify against you in family court to ensure Layla is placed in the care of people who are actually mentally stable. You will be bankrupted, isolated, and entirely erased from our legacy. This is your final ultimatum, Sienna. You either kneel on Saturday night or you lose everything. I closed my eyes, absorbing the absolute totality of his betrayal. There was no misunderstanding to clear up. There was no hidden familial loyalty waiting to be salvaged. Warren had drawn his battle lines, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing on a trapdoor. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to use Saturday night to cement his legacy in Atlanta's high society. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for, but the narrative was going to be written entirely by me. Okay, I said, letting my voice crack, perfectly simulating the sound of a woman who had been utterly defeated by the crushing weight of systemic wealth. I will do it. I will come to the Ritz-Carlton on Saturday. I will walk up to the stage. I will do whatever Bradley wants me to do. Please just do not take Layla away from me. Please unfreeze my accounts. I surrender. See that you wear something appropriate, Warren scoffed, disgusted by my rapid capitulation. Do not be late. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and set it gently onto the pristine surface of my command console. The manufactured vulnerability vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, calculating, and lethal focus. I looked up at the monitors, my mind rapidly adjusting the tactical parameters of my impending strike. Did you copy that exchange, Marcus? I asked the open channel. Loud and clear, boss, Marcus replied. They just handed you the perfect staging ground. Saturday evening arrived with a suffocating humidity that clung to the streets of downtown Atlanta, but inside the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, the climate was meticulously controlled. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer evening gowns. Waitstaff in pristine white coats glided through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with artisan hors d'oeuvres and imported champagne. This was the pinnacle of elite society. This was the highly anticipated 10-year investment anniversary gala for Kensington Capital Management. Everyone considering themselves a person of power or influence in the city was currently standing in this room, completely oblivious to the fact they were attending a celebration funded entirely by their own stolen money. I stepped through the heavy oak doors, ignoring the immediate judgmental stares from the registration desk. I did not wear the simple, subdued clothing my parents had demanded for my public humiliation. Instead, I wore a tailored mid-blue evening gown that moved like liquid armor. My hair was styled in a sleek, commanding twist. I was not dressed like a broken, disgraced veteran crawling back to them for a meager allowance. I was dressed like an apex predator stepping directly into a cage full of oblivious prey. I surveyed the perimeter with a trained, tactical eye, noting the structural exits, the location of the sound booth, and the positioning of the security personnel stationed along the paneled walls. At the far end of this ballroom, standing near the elevated main stage, Bradley Kensington was holding court. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his injured arm secured in a discreet dark sling hidden beneath his tailored jacket. He held a glass of whiskey in his good hand, laughing loudly at a joke made by a prominent local politician. Standing faithfully by his side were my parents, Warren and Vivian. They practically beamed with manufactured pride, soaking in the reflected glory of their white son-in-law. My sister Kendra clung to Bradley's healthy arm, dripping in diamonds paid for by the very people she was currently smiling at. They looked incredibly smug, deeply satisfied with the illusion they purchased with their souls. They were all waiting for my arrival. They were eagerly anticipating the moment the music would stop, the crowd would part, and I would drag myself onto that stage to drop to my knees. Warren repeatedly checked his gold Rolex, frustrated I had not arrived early to practice my groveling. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted me to bleed my dignity onto the polished hardwood floor so Bradley could magnanimously forgive me in front of the governor. I began a slow, deliberate walk across the perimeter of the ballroom. It did not take long for Bradley to spot me. Across the sea of wealthy socialites, his eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of raw, unfiltered rage cross his face as he took in my appearance. I was not cowering. I was not looking down. I held his gaze with an icy, lethal stillness that immediately disrupted his fantasy of absolute dominance. Bradley whispered something to Kendra, pulling away from the group of politicians. He set his whiskey glass onto a passing waiter's tray and moved toward the edge of the crowd. He was furious that I was not displaying the terror he had demanded. He wanted me broken before I ever touched the stairs leading up to the stage. He wanted to inflict maximum physical and psychological damage, ensuring that when I finally apologized, I would do so through genuine agonizing tears. I watched as Bradley bypassed the main floor and intercepted a group of 4 massive, imposing men standing near the velvet-draped entrance of a service corridor. They were not dressed in the standard hotel security attire. They wore tight black suits that stretched over heavily muscled frames. They were private muscle off-duty bouncers or amateur fighters Bradley had personally hired to enforce his will outside the boundaries of the law. They were brutal, unquestioning thugs brought in specifically to handle any loose ends. I maintained my pace, artificially slowing my breathing as my combat training analyzed the four targets. Their weight distribution, their heavy footfalls, the slight bulges beneath their jackets indicating concealed weapons. They were formidable, but they were extremely sloppy. Through the subtle shift in the crowd, I could clearly read Bradley's lips as he spoke to the leader of the private guards. He pointed a single aggressive finger in my direction. He leaned in close, his face twisting into a mask of pure malice. He was instructing them to intercept me before I could reach the center of the ballroom. He whispered his brutal commands with absolute terrifying clarity. He told them to surround me quietly, force me into the secluded service alley behind the kitchen, and break both of my legs. He wanted to make good on the violent threat he had issued at the barbecue. He wanted to hospitalize me, ensuring I would have to be physically carried onto the stage to deliver my apology while screaming in unimaginable pain. Bradley stepped back, a sickeningly confident smirk, returning to his face as the four massive guards nodded in unison. They fanned out, creating a tactical wedge formation as they began to push their way through the oblivious chatting crowd. Their eyes were locked directly on me, their hands subtly reaching toward their waistbands as they closed the distance. They were moving with swift, violent intent, eager to earn whatever bonus Bradley had promised them for destroying a defenseless woman. I did not stop walking for even a single second. I continued my measured, elegant pace straight toward the center of the ballroom, moving directly into the path of the four approaching giants. A normal person would have immediately panicked. A normal person would have turned around and run frantically toward the nearest exit, desperately screaming for immediate help from the heavily armed hotel security staff. But I was not a normal person. I was a weapon forged in the darkest, most unforgiving combat zones on the planet, and I was currently executing a flawless, predetermined tactical strike. I did not break my stride. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, my midnight blue gown sweeping across the polished floor as the four towering thugs closed the remaining distance. They moved with the clumsy, arrogant swagger of men who were used to intimidating unarmed civilians in dimly lit parking lots. The leader, a massive man with a thick neck and a jagged scar across his jaw, reached his thick hand out to grab my shoulder. He planned to aggressively spin me around and force me toward the service corridor exactly as Bradley had commanded. He never even managed to brush the fabric of my dress. Before his thick fingers could make contact, a blur of crisp, tailored black fabric intercepted his movement. Two members of the hotel's official security detail materialized from the periphery of the crowd with terrifying speed and absolute silence. They did not shout. They did not brandish weapons. They simply executed a synchronized textbook close-quarters takedown. The first security agent grabbed the thug's extended wrist, applied a brutal rotational lock, and drove a knee sharply into his floating rib. The giant man's eyes rolled back in agonizing shock as the air evacuated his lungs in a silent gasp. Simultaneously, the second agent clamped a tight professional sleeper hold around his thick neck, cutting off the blood flow to his brain in a matter of seconds. The thug went completely limp, his massive body instantly supported by the two agents who effortlessly dragged his unconscious frame backward toward the velvet-draped service exit. It happened so fast and with such surgical precision that the wealthy guests standing just 5 feet away did not even realize an assault had taken place. They just kept laughing and drinking their imported champagne. The remaining three thugs froze their arrogant swagger, evaporating into sheer panic as they realized they had just walked blindly into a highly coordinated ambush. They instinctually reached for the concealed weapons tucked into their waistbands, but they were entirely too slow. 6 more men in immaculate black suits stepped out from behind the towering floral arrangements and marble pillars. They were not ordinary hotel bouncers. They moved with the unmistakable, lethal discipline of special operations veterans. They isolated Bradley's hired muscle, trapping them in a tight, inescapable physical perimeter. With swift, devastating strikes to nerve clusters and pressure points, my operatives incapacitated the 3 remaining men instantly. There was no shouting, no shattered glass, no disruption to the elegant string quartet playing softly in the background. Within 15 seconds, all 4 of Bradley's violent enforcers were dragged quietly through the heavy oak doors of the service corridor, completely erased from the ballroom. I did not even break my elegant stride. I walked right through the space where the men had been standing just moments prior and continued my direct path toward Bradley. I watched his face transition from smug anticipation to absolute unadulterated horror. The color completely drained from his cheeks. His jaw went slack, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He looked frantically around the room, desperately searching for the thugs he had paid to break my legs. They were gone. He was completely unprotected. I stopped exactly 2 feet in front of him, my posture radiating total dominance. My parents, Warren and Vivian, looked at me with deep confusion, completely unaware of the invisible violent clash that had just occurred. Kendra scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "What did you do?" Bradley hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. He instinctively stepped backward, clutching his injured shoulder, suddenly realizing he was standing in the presence of a predator he could not control. "Guard security!" he barked loudly, waving his good arm frantically toward the men in black suits standing along the perimeter. "Arrest this woman immediately! She is trespassing! Remove her from my gala right now!" Not a single security guard moved to assist him. They remained standing at parade rest, their eyes locked forward, their earpieces silent. Bradley's panic escalated into sheer hysteria. "Did you not hear me?" he yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "I am Bradley Kensington. I demand that you remove her from these premises." "You are wasting your breath, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting through his panic with an icy, lethal calm. I took a deliberate step closer, invading his personal space. "Those men do not work for the Ritz-Carlton. They do not work for you. They work exclusively for me." "What are you talking about?" Vivian demanded, stepping forward to protect her precious son-in-law. "Have you lost your mind? Stop making a scene and get up on that stage to apologize right now, Sienna." I ignored my mother entirely, keeping my eyes locked on Bradley. 3 weeks ago, Vanguard Aegis quietly purchased the exclusive security contract for this entire hotel property. The men guarding the doors, the men watching the stage, and the men who just disposed of your pathetic hired muscle are all my private operatives. They are highly trained combat veterans who take their orders from one person alone. Bradley swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "You are lying," he stammered defensively. "I am completely untouchable," I replied, savoring the absolute destruction of his power. "You thought you could buy violence. You thought your stolen money made you a god. But you are just a weak, cowardly fraud standing in a room entirely controlled by my soldiers. There is absolutely nowhere left for you to hide. Your fake passport is useless. Your Russian mistress is waiting for a flight you will never board. Tonight is the end." I turned my gaze toward the stage. "I am walking up those stairs now, Bradley. But I am not going to kneel. I am going to end you." I turned my back on Bradley and walked toward the main stage. My father, Warren, stepped directly into my path. "Sienna, stop this tantrum right now," he hissed, grabbing my elbow. "Get up there, take the microphone, and deliver the apology we agreed upon. You are embarrassing, Bradley. Do you want to lose your trust fund permanently?" I wrenched my arm out of his grasp. "There is no trust fund, Dad," I replied coldly. "There is only a federal indictment waiting for you. Take your seat now." I brushed past my mother's gasping protests and ascended the short flight of velvet-carpeted stairs. The elevated platform gave me a commanding view of the entire grand ballroom. Down below, the elite investors and high society socialites began to murmur, sensing the severe shift in the atmosphere. They expected Bradley to step up and deliver his 10-year keynote address regarding their impressive portfolio returns. Instead, they got me standing tall in my midnight blue evening gown, radiating lethal composure. I raised my right hand and signaled my operatives stationed along the perimeter. With synchronized precision, my black-suited security team stepped backward through the heavy oak doors, pulling them shut. The sharp clank of the deadbolts locking echoed across the expansive ballroom. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. Men in expensive tuxedos shifted uncomfortably, while women whispered behind their jeweled clutches. They were trapped inside my meticulously designed theater of exposure. Bradley snapped out of his paralyzed state. He finally realized the absolute catastrophe unfolding before his eyes. He sprinted toward the back of the room, waving his good arm frantically at the elevated sound booth where the hotel's audiovisual technicians were seated. "Cut her microphone!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "Cut the power to the stage. Play the introduction video. Get her off that platform right now." The two technicians inside the booth scrambled, their fingers flying across the mixing board. They grabbed the master power switch and yanked it downward. Nothing happened. They clicked the microphone mute buttons frantically, but the digital display on their monitors remained frozen. "Sir, we are completely locked out," one of the technicians yelled back, his voice thick with panic. "The master system is overriding our inputs. Somebody has hacked the mainframe." I smiled, tapping the side of the sleek black microphone resting on the podium. The sharp, clear thud resonated flawlessly through the massive surround sound speakers. My cyber intelligence team at Vanguard Aegis had infiltrated the hotel's entire audiovisual network 3 hours ago. Marcus had established a hardwired bypass, giving him absolute remote control over every single speaker, projector, and lighting rig in the ballroom. Bradley's desperate commands were entirely useless. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of Atlanta," I said, my voice projecting with unwavering authority across the silent, captivated room. "My name is Sienna. I am Bradley Kensington's sister-in-law. I know you were expecting a celebration tonight. You came here to toast to a decade of unprecedented financial growth under the stewardship of Kensington Capital Management." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the faces of the wealthy investors, local politicians, and country club socialites. Down in the front row, Kendra stood frozen, her eyes darting between me and her panicked husband. Warren and Vivian looked physically ill, their pristine societal masks fracturing under the weight of my public disruption. "My family demanded that I stand on this exact stage tonight to issue a public apology," I continued smoothly, leaning closer to the microphone. "They ordered me to drop to my knees and beg for Bradley's forgiveness for a fabricated altercation. They wanted me to humiliate myself to ensure their elite status remained untarnished. However, I am not here to apologize to Bradley. I am here to apologize to all of you." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Investors exchanged confused, alarmed glances. Bradley was practically foaming at the mouth, shoving his way back toward the front of the stage, desperately trying to figure out how to stop the unstoppable force he had awakened. "I am apologizing because the man you have trusted with your generational wealth is an absolute fraud," I declared, my voice echoing like thunder. "The man my parents worship is nothing more than a common thief. There is no 10-year celebration because there are no returns. There is no hedge fund." Bradley lunged for the stage stairs, but two of my special ops veterans materialized from the shadows, blocking his path with their massive, unyielding frames. He was trapped on the floor, forced to watch his empire burn. "Marcus," I commanded into my hidden earpiece, ignoring Bradley's frantic struggles below. "Execute Phase 1. Show them the truth." Instantly, the massive high-definition projector screens positioned behind me flared to life, casting a stark, brilliant white light over the entire ballroom. The elite audience gasped as the screens displayed something entirely unexpected. Instead of a corporate logo, the massive displays showed live bank statements and real-time transaction logs. I pointed up at the glaring digits illuminating the dark room. "Look closely at the numbers behind me, ladies and gentlemen," I instructed the crowd, watching their faces morph from confusion to absolute horror. "Those are the primary operating accounts for Kensington Capital Management. Notice the balance. It is completely empty. Every single dollar you entrusted to this institution has been systematically drained." A sharp gasp rippled through the audience. A judge in the second row dropped his champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the floorboards. "This is a total lie," Bradley screamed from the base of the stairs, struggling uselessly against the grip of my trained operatives. "She is a deranged, combat-crazed lunatic. She hacked those screens to ruin my reputation. Do not listen to a word she says." I slowly shook my head, projecting pity for the pathetic man squirming below me. "I did not hack anything to ruin your reputation, Bradley," I replied. "You ruined it yourself." The glowing red zeros of the drained accounts were already burning into the retinas of every investor. It was time to shatter his personal illusions. "Marcus, execute Phase 2. I commanded through my earpiece, completely detached. Show them the exit strategy. The ledgers dissolved instantly. A high-resolution split-screen display replaced them. On the left side, a massive clear image of a United States passport appeared. The audience squinted, trying to make sense of the document. The photograph was Bradley. He sported a newly grown beard and dark sunglasses, but his arrogant jawline was identical. The name printed next to his face, however, was not Bradley Kensington. "Meet Alexander Vance," I announced, projecting my voice to reach the very back of the locked ballroom. "This is a highly sophisticated dark web forged passport. Bradley purchased it 3 weeks ago using a holding company funded entirely by your stolen investments. He stole my parents' surname to create this fake identity. He planned to use it tonight. Right now, in fact. If I had not locked those doors, he would be in a town car heading toward a private airstrip in DeKalb County." Bradley's arm flew up to cover his pale face. He stumbled backward, bumping into the sharp edge of a guest table, desperate to hide from the glaring evidence towering above him. The prominent local politicians who had been laughing with him just 10 minutes ago now physically backed away, treating him like a highly contagious disease. But a coward never flees empty-handed, and he certainly never flees alone. I continued gesturing to the right side of the massive projection. The static image shifted into a crisp, live security camera feed. The footage showed a sleek private Gulfstream jet idling on a dark runway. Standing near the boarding stairs was a stunning, blonde woman in her late 20s, wearing a designer trench coat and checking her diamond-encrusted watch frantically. "Allow me to introduce Ekaterina Volkov," I said, pausing to let the name sink into the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom. "She is a Russian national and Bradley's secret mistress. They have been maintaining a highly classified, intimate relationship for the past 3 years. He bought her a luxury condominium in Miami. He showered her with expensive gifts. He funded her entire lavish lifestyle using the capital you entrusted to his firm. She is currently standing on the tarmac, nervously waiting for Alexander Vance to finalize his offshore wire transfers so they can board that jet and disappear to Zurich together." A piercing, guttural scream suddenly ripped through the silent ballroom. It did not come from an angry investor or a betrayed business partner. It came from the front row. My sister Kendra stood paralyzed, staring up at the live feed of the beautiful blonde woman pacing on the runway. The heavy diamond necklace around her throat caught the harsh light of the projectors, suddenly looking less like a symbol of elite status and more like a glowing collar of absolute humiliation. "No," Kendra shrieked, her voice cracking as she wildly shook her head. "No, this is a lie. Sienna, you are making this up. You hired an actress. Bradley would never do this to me. We are going to Paris next month for our anniversary." She spun around, grabbing Bradley by the lapels of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. She shook him violently. "Tell them she is lying, Bradley. Tell them this is a sick, jealous joke. Tell them—" Bradley did not look at her. He could not even meet his wife's eyes. His gaze was glued to the floor, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. He tried to push her hands away. His dislocated shoulder severely limited his mobility. "Get off me, Kendra," he muttered weakly. His aristocratic accent completely stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "Just shut up and let me think." His dismissive, pathetic response was the final hammer blow. The pristine illusion of Kendra's high society marriage shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of her country club peers. Kendra released his jacket and staggered backward, her hands covering her mouth, as genuine, devastated sobs racked her body. She looked at the faces of the wealthy women she had spent years desperately trying to impress. They were not offering her sympathy. They were staring at her with profound disgust and mockery. She was no longer the envied wife of a financial titan. She was the clueless, discarded punchline to the biggest scam in Atlanta's history. My mother Vivian rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Kendra, but her eyes remained fixed on Bradley in sheer disbelief. "You were going to leave her," Vivian gasped, her voice trembling with the realization that her golden white son-in-law was a monster. "You were going to abandon my daughter and run away with a mistress." Bradley ignored Vivian entirely. He looked up at me, standing on the stage, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered desperation. "Please, Sienna." he begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic, whimpering plea that only the front rows could hear. I will give you whatever you want. I will transfer $10 million to your account right now. Just unlock the doors. Just let me walk out of here. I will never bother you or your daughter again. Please. I stared down at the broken, sweating fraud kneeling in the ruins of his own making. You misunderstand the situation, Bradley. I replied, my voice projecting clearly through the microphone. I do not want your money. I do not negotiate with predators. You wanted to make me a public spectacle. You wanted me to drop to my knees and beg. I am simply returning the favor, but I am doing it with the absolute truth. I turned my attention back to the restless, furious crowd of investors. Now let us examine exactly who he planned to leave behind to take the legal fall for his systemic fraud. Marcus, bring up the corporate incorporation documents for the shell entities. I commanded into my earpiece, my voice slicing through the escalating panic that was rapidly consuming the ballroom. The live feed of the Russian mistress vanished from the massive screens behind me. In its place, a complex, interconnected web of offshore holding companies, shadow accounts, and fraudulent domestic corporations materialized in stark, high-definition clarity. I stepped away from the podium, pacing slowly across the stage as I gestured toward the digital labyrinth that Bradley Kensington had spent the last decade building. What you are looking at is not a hedge fund, I announced, projecting my voice over the rising tide of wealthy outrage. You are looking at a textbook classic Ponzi scheme. Bradley did not invest a single dollar of your capital into real estate technology or emerging markets. He simply used the massive deposits from new investors to pay fabricated artificial dividends to the early investors. He created a completely closed loop of financial deception, bleeding the principal funds dry while actively skimming millions off the top to finance his luxury lifestyle, his offshore accounts, and his secret Russian mistress. The ballroom erupted. The realization of absolute financial ruin hit the elite crowd like a physical shockwave. A prominent real estate developer in the third row hurled his crystal champagne flute against a marble pillar, screaming profanities at Bradley. Wealthy socialites who had just been bragging about their incredible portfolio returns were now collapsing into their velvet chairs, clutching their chests as they realized their children's trust funds, their retirement accounts, and their generational wealth had been entirely eradicated. The sheer, unadulterated fury of hundreds of scammed billionaires and millionaires began to rapidly focus on the trembling, sweating man pinned to the floor by my security operatives. I am going to kill you, Bradley! An elderly country club board member roared, lunging forward before being restrained by his own terrified family members. You took everything from us. You looked me in the eye and stole my pension. Keep your focus on the screens, ladies and gentlemen, I ordered loudly, refusing to let the chaos derail my final, most lethal revelation. Because a fraud of this massive systemic scale requires legal insulation, a coward like Bradley Kensington would never risk putting his own signature on the federal documents that manage a massive criminal enterprise. He needed disposable pawns. He needed arrogant, status-obsessed fools who were so desperate to be accepted into high society that they would sign anything he put in front of them without reading the fine print. Marcus, I said coldly, execute Phase 3. Highlight the signature lines on the primary shell companies. The complex web of corporate entities on the screen zoomed in rapidly, focusing on the highly classified articles of incorporation for the three main dummy corporations that had facilitated the $50 million theft. The digital highlighter swept across the bottom of the federal documents, illuminating two specific, unmistakable signatures in bright, glowing yellow. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the audience. The names printed clearly under the title of primary legal directors were Warren and Vivian. My parents froze. The color instantly and completely drained from their faces, leaving them looking like hollow, terrified ghosts. Warren's jaw dropped open, his eyes darting frantically from the massive projection screen to the furious, bloodthirsty crowd surrounding him. Vivian let out a strangled, high-pitched wheeze, clutching her diamond necklace as if she was suddenly suffocating. That is right. I declared, my voice echoing with absolute merciless finality. Bradley is not the legal director of the companies that stole your money. My parents are. For the past 5 years, they have been the sole authorized signatories on the fraudulent accounts. Bradley manipulated their pathetic, desperate need for your elite validation. He promised them a seat at your prestigious tables, and in exchange, they blindly signed the legal documents that allowed him to launder your fortunes. No. Warren screamed, his voice cracking with absolute raw terror. He raised his hands defensively, backing away from the glaring eyes of the scammed investors. We did not know, we swear to God, we had absolutely no idea what he was doing. He told us we were just acting as silent partners. He told us it was standard corporate procedure. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for federal wire fraud. Dad, I replied smoothly, staring down at him with zero sympathy. You wanted the prestige of being a financial titan. You wanted to brag to your country club friends about your elite corporate board seats. You got exactly what you wanted. You are the legal face of Kensington Capital Management. When the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation trace that missing $50 million, they are not going to look at the man fleeing with a fake passport. They are going to look directly at the legally binding signatures on those corporate charters. Vivian collapsed onto the hardwood floor, her designer gown pooling around her as she began to hyperventilate. She reached her trembling hands up toward me, tears ruining her meticulous makeup. Sienna, please, she sobbed, her voice a desperate, pathetic screech. You have to help us. You are a military intelligence officer. You have government connections. You can hack these files and delete our names. You cannot let us go to federal prison. We are your parents. You chose this. I continued, pacing slowly back to the center of the stage. You chose the illusion of wealth over the safety of your own granddaughter. You worshipped a man simply because he was born into a society you desperately wanted to infiltrate. Now you get to face the absolute, undeniable consequences of your own blinding arrogance. The angry crowd began to completely surround them. The furious investors closed in tightly, shouting threats and demanding their stolen millions back. Warren tried to push a furious real estate mogul away, but he was violently shoved right back down. Chaos consumed the grand ballroom in a terrifying tidal wave of tailored suits and shattered crystal. The elegant facade of Atlanta's high society completely disintegrated, replaced by a primal, bloodthirsty mob. Security barriers were kicked aside as dozens of furious investors swarmed the perimeter of the stage, screaming demands at my terrified parents. Vivian was weeping uncontrollably, crawling backward on her hands and knees across the polished hardwood floor, desperately trying to escape the grasping hands of the people she had scammed. Warren curled into a pathetic ball, shielding his face as a prominent local judge kicked him squarely in the ribs. In the center of the mayhem, Kendra finally snapped. The sheer humiliation of being publicly discarded for a Russian mistress completely broke her mind. She let out an ear-piercing scream and lunged directly at Bradley. She did not slap him. She curled her manicured fingers into claws and viciously raked them down his face, leaving 4 deep, bloody scratches from his cheekbone to his jaw. Bradley roared in pain, swinging his uninjured arm to aggressively shove his wife away. Kendra hit the ground hard, her designer gown tearing as she scrambled right back to her feet, completely consumed by a feral rage. "You ruined my life!" Kendra shrieked, grabbing a heavy silver ice bucket from a nearby catering cart. She hurled it directly at his head. Bradley barely ducked in time, the bucket smashing into the stage stairs with a deafening crash. "I gave you everything, you absolute monster. You made me a public laughingstock." Bradley ignored her entirely. He realized his physical enforcers were gone, his reputation was eradicated, and a violent mob of billionaires was closing in on him fast. Survival instinct took over. He frantically dug his good hand into the interior pocket of his torn tuxedo jacket and yanked out his encrypted smartphone. His thumb flew across the screen, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic desperation. He was abandoning everyone. He just needed to execute the final, pre-programmed offshore wire transfer. If he could move that $50 million to his secure account in Switzerland, he could still slip out the back doors during the riot, hijack a car, and reach the private airstrip. I stood above him on the elevated stage, watching him sweat and tremble. He thought his dark web encryption was impenetrable. He thought his digital vault was invisible. He was wrong. "Marcus," I said calmly into my earpiece, leaning casually against the wooden podium. "Is the intercept protocol ready?" "Ready and waiting, boss," Marcus replied, his voice crisp and confident in my ear. "I am locked onto his mobile network signature. We have full breach capability." "Mirror his display to the main projectors," I commanded. "Let them see exactly what a coward looks like when he runs." The massive digital screens behind me flickered. The complex financial ledgers vanished. In their place, a flawless high-definition replication of Bradley's smartphone screen illuminated the dark ballroom. The crowd immediately stopped screaming and looked up, captivated by the live feed of the criminal's final desperate act. Bradley was completely oblivious to the fact that his private phone was currently being broadcast to hundreds of people. He was staring down at his device, his thumb shaking violently as he navigated past his secure biometric firewall and opened a hidden banking application. "Hi is attempting to transfer the remaining $50 million of your capital right now," I announced through the microphone, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. "Watch him try to steal your futures." Bradley froze his head, snapping up to look at the massive screens towering over the stage. He saw his own thumbprint hovering over the digital authorization button, magnified to 20 feet tall. A look of sheer, unadulterated horror washed over his bloody face. He looked at his phone, then back up at the screens, realizing he was entirely trapped inside my digital cage. "Do it, Bradley," I taunted him, my voice dripping with cold amusement. "Press the button, take the money and run." He swallowed hard, panic entirely consuming him. He pressed his thumb against the screen, initiating the final offshore wire transfer. The massive projectors displayed a small gray loading circle. The text on the screen read, "Authenticating transaction." The entire ballroom held its breath, watching the progress bar slowly fill. Bradley let out a shaky, triumphant laugh, believing his encryption had somehow beaten my cyber team. The loading bar hit 100%. The screen flashed bright white. Then a massive, glaring red error message completely overtook the display. The word "denied" flashed in bold, capitalized letters. Below it, a secondary notification appeared reading, "Server seized, funds unavailable." Bradley stared at his phone in absolute disbelief. He frantically tapped the screen, trying to reload the application, trying to bypass the error code, but the device was completely locked. The red warning message remained stubbornly illuminated. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, begging desperation. "What did you do?" Bradley gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Where is the money? Where is my money?" "It was never your money, Bradley," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "You are dealing with Vanguard Aegis. Did you really think I was going to let you hold on to a single dime of stolen capital? My elite cyber team infiltrated your offshore routing protocols 10 minutes before I ever stepped foot on this stage. We drained your Swiss accounts. We froze your domestic holding companies, and we diverted every single penny of that $50 million into a secure, federally monitored escrow account." Bradley dropped to his knees, the encrypted phone slipping from his trembling fingers and clattering against the hardwood floor. He was completely broken. He had no money, no passport, no muscle, and no escape route. His custom tuxedo was ruined, covered in dirt and blood. Kendra stood right over him, entirely devoid of any sympathy. She realized her absolute downfall. A deafening chorus of sirens suddenly pierced the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Red and blue emergency lights flashed violently against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting frantic, pulsing shadows over the enraged mob of investors. The muffled, authoritative shouts of federal tactical units echoed loudly from the hotel lobby. The locked oak doors of the ballroom did not just open, they were aggressively breached. Dozens of heavily armed Federal Bureau of Investigation agents, flanked by forensic accountants from the Securities and Exchange Commission, flooded into the room. They wore dark tactical vests and carried thick plastic zip ties, moving with overwhelming synchronized precision. I had transmitted the complete, unredacted digital dossier of Bradley's entire Ponzi scheme to the Atlanta field office, precisely 4 hours ago, handing them the biggest white-collar bust of the decade on an absolute silver platter. The federal agents cut through the crowd of stunned billionaires like a hot knife through butter. "Federal agents, nobody moves," the lead agent roared, his voice amplified by a heavy bullhorn. He pointed directly at the bloody kneeling figure of Bradley Kensington. "Target acquired. Move in." Two massive agents tackled Bradley to the polished hardwood floor, slamming his face into the spilled champagne and broken crystal. He shrieked in absolute agony as they aggressively wrenched his recently dislocated shoulder behind his back, securing heavy plastic restraints around his wrists. "Bradley Kensington, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and interstate flight to avoid prosecution," the agent recited coldly, hauling the disgraced hedge fund manager roughly to his feet. Bradley did not fight back. He hung his head, sobbing uncontrollably, completely stripped of his arrogant, old money facade. Kendra watched the federal agents drag her husband away, her hands trembling violently. An investigator approached her, demanding she hand over all jewelry and accessories purchased with illicit funds. She numbly unclasped her diamond necklace, handing it over like a defeated prisoner of war. Her high society dreams were completely eradicated. The tactical units then turned their unwavering attention toward the front of the stage, brandishing a second set of federal warrants. "Warren and Vivian," the lead agent barked, reading from a bright digital tablet. "We have active warrants for your arrest regarding your roles as the primary legal signatories of Kensington Capital Management." Panic completely overtook my parents. The pristine high society image they had worshipped for decades vaporized in a single instant. Vivian let out a horrifying guttural wail. She scrambled across the floor, ignoring the sharp shards of broken glass tearing into the knees of her expensive designer gown. She reached the base of the stage and desperately grabbed the hem of my midnight blue dress. "Sienna, please!" Vivian shrieked, dark mascara streaming down her panicked face. "You cannot let them do this to us. We are your parents. Tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them we did not know anything about his stolen money." Warren dropped to his knees right beside her, his chest heaving with sheer terror. The proud, judgmental man who had banished me from the family earlier that week was now weeping like a terrified, helpless child. "Sienna, you have military clearance," Warren begged, his voice cracking as he looked up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. "You own Vanguard Aegis. You have deep connections in the federal government. Call someone right now. Call the director of the FBI. Tell them to drop the charges against us. We will give you absolutely anything you want. We will give you the house. We will make you the sole heir to everything. Just do not let them put us in federal handcuffs." I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No pity, no anger, no vindication. I only felt a cold, empty clarity. "You chose this exact path," I stated evenly, my voice projecting clearly through the stage microphone so the federal agents could hear every single word. "When Bradley threatened to break my arm in front of my 7-year-old daughter, you aggressively defended him. When he threatened to call Child Protective Services and take Layla away from me, you explicitly promised to testify on his behalf. You chose a wealthy, abusive fraud over your own flesh and blood because you wanted a prestigious seat at the country club. You eagerly sold your souls for a cheap illusion." The federal agents stepped forward, grabbing Warren and Vivian tightly by their arms. "Stand up," the agent ordered, pulling my father to his feet. "Put your hands behind your back right now." Vivian screamed hysterically as the cold plastic zip ties secured her wrists. "Sienna, you are an absolute monster," Vivian wailed, fighting uselessly against the federal agent's firm grip. "How can you do this to your own family? We gave you life." "You are not my family," I replied calmly, stepping back from the edge of the wooden stage. "You are just criminals facing the inevitable consequences of your own blinding greed. You wanted to be the elite faces of this massive financial empire, and now you get to be the elite faces of its complete destruction. Enjoy your new status. I hope the federal penitentiary has a country club membership you can desperately try to buy your way into." I watched the agents drag them away, their frantic, tearful pleading entirely drowned out by the deafening clamor of the ruined crowd. My parents were dragged through the shattered doors, officially erased from polite society. The legacy of Warren and Vivian was permanently reduced to nothing more than a federal inmate booking number. The ballroom around me was a war zone of consequence. My perfectly executed operation was finally complete. The elite predators had officially become the prey. I took a deep breath, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute, uncompromised justice settle over my shoulders as the sirens wailed loudly outside again. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the shattered ballroom in harsh strokes of red and blue. I stepped down from the wooden stage, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood floor. The frantic screams of the furious investors had faded into a dull, echoing roar as the federal agents secured the perimeter. I walked directly toward the center of the room where my parents were kneeling in the spilled champagne. Their wrists were bound tightly behind their backs with thick plastic restraints. They looked up at me, their faces contorted in absolute misery, stripped of every ounce of the arrogant pride they had worn like armor for decades. "Sienna, you have to stop them," my father pleaded, his voice cracking as he strained against the grip of a towering federal agent. "We are your blood. You cannot just stand there and watch your own family be destroyed. We made a terrible mistake. We trusted the wrong man. Please just tell them to let us go. You have the power to fix this." I looked down at him with absolute icy calm. I felt no anger left in my veins. The rage that had fueled me for the past week had entirely burned out, leaving behind nothing but cold, undeniable truth. "You did not make a simple mistake, Warren," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the chaotic noise of the ballroom. "You made a calculated choice. When Bradley threw those fighting gloves at my chest and threatened to hospitalize me, you stood there and watched. When he threatened to call Child Protective Services and take my daughter away, you enthusiastically agreed to help him. You actively chose to destroy my life because you were so desperate to impress a wealthy white man. We were just trying to protect our standing in the community." My mother sobbed, her designer mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "Bradley promised us access to exclusive circles we had worked our entire lives to enter. We thought he was building a massive financial legacy for all of us. We thought you were just being difficult and jealous of your sister." "You sold your own flesh and blood for a country club membership and a pathetic lie," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "You prioritized high society over your own granddaughter's safety. You allowed a violent predator to manipulate you because he wore an expensive suit and possessed the racial privilege you blindly worshipped. Now you get to pay the ultimate price for that toxic worship." Across the room, two federal agents hoisted Bradley roughly to his feet. His custom tuxedo was brutally torn and stained with his own blood. The arrogant smirk he had worn since the day I met him was completely gone. He was nothing but a sniveling, broken coward. He looked at me, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to beg one last time, but an agent aggressively shoved him forward before he could speak. Bradley Kensington, the fake financial titan of Atlanta, was dragged out the double doors. I knew exactly what awaited him in the justice system. The federal prosecutors I had collaborated with would ensure he faced a strict minimum of 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary for wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. He would never see a single dime of his stolen wealth or a day of freedom ever again. I turned my attention back to my trembling parents. The lead federal agent stepped forward holding a digital tablet containing the massive asset seizure warrants. "Are these two individuals the primary legal directors of the fraudulent shell companies?" the agent asked me, his tone strictly professional. "Yes, they absolutely are," I confirmed without a single shred of hesitation. "They signed every single legal document to facilitate this massive scam." My parents wailed in devastating unison, realizing I was truly not going to save them. The federal agent nodded to his deputies, who instantly hauled my parents to their feet. Because of their sheer ignorance and lack of direct involvement in the actual money transfers, I knew they would likely avoid a long prison sentence through a desperate plea deal. However, their financial ruin was absolute and entirely permanent. The Securities and Exchange Commission was currently freezing every single bank account attached to their names. Their sprawling Buckhead mansion, their luxury cars, and their pristine country club memberships would be seized to pay back the scammed investors. They were being stripped of their wealth and their elite status in real time. They would be left in total ruin, publicly disgraced and shunned by the very society they had sacrificed me to impress. I watched them being marched toward the grand exit, their heads hanging in deep shame. Kendra sat alone on an overturned chair nearby, tightly clutching her torn designer dress. She was weeping hysterically, rocking back and forth as she stared at the empty space where her wealthy husband had just been arrested. She had absolutely no money, no husband, and no future. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. She had willingly chosen her toxic path alongside them. I turned my back on the wreckage of my former family. I walked past the furious investors and the swarming federal agents, moving deliberately toward the main exit. The heavy glass doors slid open, and I stepped into the crisp, cool night air of Atlanta. The flashing emergency lights reflected off the sleek black hood of my waiting armored vehicle. My security operative stood by the car, opening the rear door for me with a highly respectful nod. I slid into the comfortable leather seat and closed the heavy door, sealing out the noise of the loud sirens. The powerful engine hummed quietly as the driver pulled away. I was returning home to Layla. I felt completely safe, victorious, and completely free from my toxic family forever.